Alright guys, Rab here today. I want to talk about coaches in Call of Duty. This is a topic which has changed and evolved over time. A couple of years ago, people were saying, do you even need coaches in Call of Duty? What can they add to the players that already know everything that can be possibly known about the game? But now it's pretty much generally accepted that most of the top teams have a coach of some form or another, and we see it in other esports as well. Even though they don't necessarily add any game knowledge necessarily or anything like that, they do have other things that they add to the team. So Saint, for example, in his bio, he says he's the prime veto creator or whatever for eUnited, and TP, of course, of Optic Gaming, you know. So they look at strategies, they look at their opponents, what their opponents could be doing better, and do things outside of the game that their team could not necessarily do, help their team go through VODs of past events, look through what opponents are playing at, and, you know, can create some S&D strategies like Beowulf has done for the Evil Geniuses squad that won the World Championship in World War II. But really the question is nowadays, should they be allowed back on stage? Back in the day, the coaches used to be able to stand behind the players, and I'm not exactly sure when this was phased out, but I know that it could happen all the way up until Black Ops 3, I believe. I don't know whether there was an intermission there, but I'll show you a couple of funny clips in a second from the Black Ops 2 days. And I also remember Pamaj was like coaching Optic Gaming at ESWC 2016, I believe, in Black Ops 3. He was standing behind them, able to call stuff out to them, communicate with them when the next hardpoint was rotating and all that stuff. So it's pretty much generally accepted that coaches can add something outside of the game, but the question is, what I'm going to cover today, is whether they should be allowed to communicate with their team within the game itself, within the hardpoint map, or whether, as it currently stands, they can't be on stage with their players and can only communicate with them between maps. And as Saint says here, there's some difficulties in this communication in a lot of circumstances. So, like, if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new and you think I've earned it. And firstly, I'm just going to show you a couple of funny clips from back in the day. Black Ops 2 Call of Duty, man, this is pinnacle stuff.
Look at your jacket, that shit from the Salvation Army. Don't choke! Oh fuck, dude, it's like a victim. Dude, did your barber pass out right here? Jesus.
I'm not adjusting everyone here. I don't really care what you say in any category. I win. Sorry.
My fault, bro. We don't know how to do coke. We ain't on that coke shit, you know what I'm saying? We ain't sorting that white shit like you. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, let him know I'm here. This is my building. Let him know. I am Hilton, and this is my building. And this is my city. You're welcome in my city. It's still mine.
There he is, man. That's Hilton, an absolute classic. If you guys haven't seen this video, I'll link it down below. This is another one, of course. This is Mr. X behind the Complexity team at the time. And, you know, this is just an example of what coaches were back in Black Ops 2. Like, they didn't add any kind of strategy or anything like that. Mr. X supposedly was helping these guys, like, training regimes and getting everything sorted. But this is what he did during the game.
Oh! Let's go! Put up! Let's get this! Theory! Get a kill! Get a kill! It was Neslo last time! Oh! That's why you got dropped! That's why you got dropped! That's why you got dropped! Way to go!
And there it is. It's an absolute classic. I thought you guys might enjoy that. And yeah, so that's basically what coaches were back in the Black Ops 2 days. And by Black Ops 3, they phased them out so you can no longer talk to your team mid-game. But Saint, as a coach, obviously, kind of biased in this scenario, wants to have that freedom to be able to talk to his team mid-game. So, to follow on from that, and yeah, I've taken the jacket off. This Reddit thread from a few days ago, by the time you're watching this, probably a few weeks ago. But regardless, definitely some interesting points on either side of the equation here. And I don't really have too much of an opinion at this point, but I'll go through my thoughts on it, and we'll see what the community thinks in general. So, Marta kind of answers my earlier question here, saying it was implemented due to cheating at the Aussie Pro League qualifier from Black Ops 3, and someone actually goes on to say later down that it might have been someone in the crowd holding up like A or B, whichever site they were going to, and then the coach could see that much easier than the players. But, you know, I don't think that's too much of an argument, considering that, someone could just get sent a text. The pro has a phone in their pocket. It vibrates when they're going to A. It's like, yo, guys, let's rotate, So I don't really think that's too much of an argument, but regardless, maybe that's why the rule was implemented in the first place, just to clear that up. And McBaggins has a really interesting point here about the gap it creates and the entry barrier, I guess you could say, for amateur teams trying to break into the scene when they don't necessarily have the money, as you can see right here, to afford a coach. But then again, the way I see it, a coach is kind of, once you've got a really good squad, a coach is the thing that could potentially step you up to the next level. And what we're talking about here is not necessarily that you should have coaches full stop, but it's how much the coaches can communicate with their team. And yeah, I do think they have a big impact, as we'll talk about in a second. So scroll down a little bit further. I think 8-Bit Nacho makes a fair point here about, why would you not want them in game? So 8-Bit Nacho says, I personally don't think anyone who doesn't have a direct input into the game should be able to influence it. The results should be determined by players and players alone. What I like about this opinion is that I think that there's some players which having a coach takes away from the skill gap. I believe Swalzy, if that's how you pronounce it, expands on this a little bit further down if I can find his comment here. So yeah, here it is. In Halo, coaches are needed because of the power weapon timers, and it would be impossible for players to keep track of that. Coaches in COD wouldn't do anything the players can't do and would only make their lives easier and reduce the need for good IGLs and communicators. This is a point I really like because I'm not so sure whether I want the coaches to be able to communicate with their teams in-game. So, for example, when I was at Birmingham, I was doing some refereeing, and one of the games I was refereeing was Optic versus Heretics it was the group stage, and TP was just sitting there on his chair, calmly laying back. It was a casual match, like they'd already qualified out the group or whatever the situation happened to be, and yeah, it was a pretty chill match. He was just sitting there, lazing back, and his team was just playing out the game. On the other side of the station, the Heretics coach was going nuts. He was screaming right in the ear of his guys. Like, I don't know whether he was barking orders, because the thing is, it was in Spanish. So I don't know whether he's telling his guys, like, come on guys, like, oh, nice win or whatever. But no, he could have been potentially saying, like, guys, rotate, like, he could have been potentially effectively being the communicator and the IGL for the team, telling them when to rotate, telling them when, how to play for streaks and all these sort of things, which isn't allowed in the current state with coaches not being able to communicate with players. So effectively I had to go on stage and ask them both to leave, which meant that they had no opportunity really to communicate with their team between the games. Because one thing at these events is that it is done to a tight schedule. Like, the pros are very pressed. Like, I had to press the pros quite a lot of times, even though I didn't necessarily want to just crack on with the match, because we've got to keep to the schedule, I guess. So there's not much opportunity once the coach has left the stage to have the option to speak to his team between matches. I remember there was a game at Vegas between Reciprocity and Evil Geniuses. It wasn't even played on a station that was like in the open. It was behind the scenes somewhere. I don't even know if the coaches had the opportunity to go back there and speak with their teams at the time, like Shane of Reciprocity, Riven, of course, of Evil Geniuses. Maybe I'm wrong, but certainly there are scenarios where once the coach isn't allowed to be on the stage, it's very difficult for them to get the headsets off the player and then actually have a chat with them and see, what strategies can we take into this next map? Like, have a look at my notes and what I made and what the other team does on this map. Something of a part of that to play in that is that Call of Duty, the maps are very short, like 10 minutes, something like that, and therefore there's not much break between maps. CSGO, for example, 45-minute map potentially, and then they have like 10-15 minutes rest before the next one. Whereas Call of Duty is quick fire. You don't have as much time to talk to your team, especially if you're not allowed on stage behind them. So back to the story about the Heretic situation. I'm not sure whether I like the fact that even if it was allowed, that the Heretics coach could shout orders to his team. And it also happened in the open bracket as well, as Beowulf goes on to discuss here. There was this Italian guy just screaming in the ears of his players. And I was like, mate, this just isn't allowed. Like, one thing I don't necessarily like about the fact that that's possible, so even if it was possible, if he was allowed to have a headset on and communicate with his team, I don't necessarily like how it takes all the skill away from the in-game leader that is in the game. So I'm just going to use JCap as an example player. I think he's a super cerebral player. He really understands what's going on in the game. He can see all the pieces, all the chess pieces moving around the board. He can predict the spawns. He understands when his team is going to be close to streaks. And, I mean, okay, maybe Jacob isn't the best example of this. Maybe there's other players better. But there certainly are players who are really good at this, like, cerebral element of the game, understanding all the different ideas and considering all different aspects and, you know, using your pieces to the best of your ability. And, okay, you have players that are just set slayers. Just run around and kill people. I'll deal with making the calls, making the strategic ideas, deciding what to use on the fly. Having a coach that can call out the fact that, oh, guys gotta rotate. You can see everyone's perspective from behind them and decide, yeah, okay, you're close to your streak. It's time to put your assault pack down, or, you know, whatever the situation would be, or let's pop 200 health now. It takes away from the players in the game to decide that amongst themselves. And I think that's a really big skill gap, actually, between not only players, okay, I'm going to keep using Cap as an example, players like him, or maybe a Crim6 or a Calm or something on Optic Gaming, who knows. Those sort of players who really understand the game to a great extent, having TP behind them to just tell them what's going on takes away from that skill and takes away maybe from the advantage that a team like eUnited has with Jacob over another team that doesn't have such a fantastic player in terms of thinking about the game and considering all the different aspects of it at once. If the coach can do that for the players, then maybe there's a skill gap that's lost there that all the top teams just get balanced out. And okay, right, yeah, the coach also has a skill gap in terms of how good the coaches are, but I don't really care about the coaches. I want to know about the players, and I like the idea that some players can be pure slayers and some players have other elements of the game that mean they can drop a 0.9, but the other things they add to the game are very important. When you have a coach that can communicate to the players in game, Jacob's 0.9 doesn't look so impressive anymore. So yeah, as a final brief point here, I think that people got tired of the constant screaming and cheerleading that I showed at the start of the video with those Black Ops 2 and Ghost clips, and yeah, Bevel says that it's a different era of COD. It probably would not be like that again. It very much would not be like that. Also, that as you could see in that Complexity versus TK clip, they were playing super close to each other, and I guess this potentially could happen on like Bravo stations, stuff like that. But on main stage, the games are separated by a long way. Like the coaches are on the opposite side of the stage, and yeah, what Saint says in his tweet here, that Teep and Saint himself had to watch their teams play from the crowd in the finals of CWL Las Vegas, that definitely shouldn't be something that's happening. I guess the situation was there wasn't enough time between the games for them to go up on stage and talk to their team about the strategies, but, you know, what sort of compromises could we come up with here? Maybe we have a situation where, okay, you can't talk to your team between the games, but you can stand behind them and watch them and see what's going on, spectate, give your team some ideas directly from behind them between the games, similar to what CS coaches can do between rounds, I believe. But they can't talk during the rounds, they can't talk during like technical pauses, things like that. So maybe that would be a good compromise. The coaches definitely want this option to talk to the team during the game. They want to add their input, of course, but maybe it does take away from the competitive nature and reduces a skill gap to some extent that the teams have. So those are my thoughts on it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like if you did, subscribe if you're new and you think I've earned it, of course. And hopefully you guys enjoy these type of videos, probably doing a few more of these here and there. Like something that people were talking about in the community, have a look through the responses that people gave and then help you guys form some sort of opinion and just having a discussion on things, because who doesn't like that after all? So thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.